I hesitate to even make this video, but this wolf-bitten guy who I debated last week didn't even put the topic of our debate in the title or the description when he uploaded the video. And then to top it off, he took some personal messages that we exchanged and left out a lot of information, pretended it was a debate, and then added his own commentary. So, to make matters even worse, we had originally agreed that neither one of us would allow anyone to upload or publish any kind of edited version of the debate. It must be played in its entirety. And then a friend of his did exactly that, leaving out, again, very important information. And what did he do? He endorsed it and shared it. So I'm going to give my version of exactly why Wolf Bitten lost our debate. I saw you post in a group where you had claimed that Neanderthals were a race of modern humans. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
A 2017 article called Why Race is Not a Thing According to Genetics, published in National Geographic magazine, can help us understand exactly why Wolfbitten is wrong here. It mainly focuses on a book by geneticist Adam Rutherford called A Brief History of Everyone Who Ever Lived. To quote the article, in many ways, genetics makes a mockery of race. The characteristics of normal human variation we use to determine broad social categories of race, such as black, Asian, or white, are mostly things like skin color, morphological features, or hair texture, and those are all biologically encoded. But when we look at the full genomes from people all over the world, those differences represent a tiny fraction of the differences between people. There is, for instance, more genetic diversity within Africa than in the rest of the world put together. If you take someone from Ethiopia and someone from Sudan, they're more likely to be more genetically different from each other than either one of those people is to anyone else on the planet. The article goes on to say that Denisovans, Neanderthals, and Homo sapiens are clearly different species. To quote it, it got even crazier a year later when the tip of a little finger bone and the molar tooth of a teenage girl were found in a cave in Russia in a place called Denisova. That proved enough to get the full genome out of this creature, which turned out not to be Homo sapiens, not Homo neanderthalensis, and not anything we were aware of. We call these people the Denisovans or Denisovans. They're a human species, but are not us, not Neanderthals, and not one that was previously known. We saw that we interbred with the Denisovans, and they interbred with us. The further you go east today, the more Denisovan DNA you see living in people and the less Neanderthal, which is exactly what I was explaining during my presentation in our debate. Here's another glaring error that Wolfbitten made.
The problem is you don't have a drop of DNA to prove this.
This is the oldest DNA we have from Neanderthals. Some dispute whether it's Neanderthals or whether it's actually Homo heidelbergensis because it was right at that transition phase with them. We'll get into that in just a minute. How and when did we diverge? You can see the kind of our family tree here with Homo erectus back here. We've got Homo heidelbergensis right here in between. We're on the bottom here. This is modern humans, Homo sapiens here. The Sema hominins we just talked about are right here near the Denisovan Neanderthal split. And again, 430,000 years ago. What we see in comparing the Denisovan genome, because we have that one too, it dates about 60 to 80,000 years old. We have that from some teeth that were found in Asia there. We can compare that genome with the Neanderthal genome and with modern Homo sapiens, and we can see that there was interbreeding going on at different times.
Now, you have a great hypothesis there, okay? The only problem is it's untestable. You just simply cannot test it. And so you don't even have a workable scientific theory. If it's untestable, you just simply cannot call it a theory. What you're going to have in order to test your hypothesis is the actual DNA from these alleged ancestors.
The Neanderthal genome completed in 2010 shows that modern non-Africans have between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA. This is where Wolfbitten tries to say that I claimed they were our direct ancestors. I never once claimed Neanderthals were our direct ancestor. I clearly showed they were on separate branch, but some interbreeding occurred. Here's a little bit different look at the split and where the interbreeding occurred. Over here on the left, again, we have our common ancestor, which would have been Homo heidelbergensis. We have the Neanderthals on the top, and where they actually died out here. Homo sapiens going in a different direction, where if you look at the very bottom, we have the San Bushmen. We have other South African tribes where we don't see any Neanderthal. What we see is the Neanderthal interbreeding took place in here, and we see that going onwards to Asia and into Europe.
You don't have the DNA from any of these. And you can't prove that any of them are related to anything.
It was like talking to a wall. I brought up 4 completed genomes from 3, possibly 4 different species that were dated to different time intervals, and they showed exactly how and when we diverged.
You also brought up the dogs. Okay. That's another place where I believe evolution is fraudulent.
He brought up dogs. I brought up coyotes and wolves. Let's look at exactly what I did say. Same thing with coyotes and wolves. I think everybody agreed that they're different species. Sure, they're both canines or whatever, but they are different species. But just the same way, we can see that they can at times produce fertile offspring, especially when they're breeding back with one of the parent species.
Because you see, we do have dogs and wolves in the same species, and we have coyotes in a separate species, and yet they are able to actually reproduce fertile offspring.
For a moment there, I thought he got that. He even went on to make another video since our debate where he said the same thing.
Say hello to everybody, Tracy.
Hey, everybody.
Well, it's good having you on. And tonight we're going to do a little something. Tracy, you saw our debate with Bill Ludlow, and several of the people out here saw it. Between his channel, Steve's channel, my channel, and another one, there were thousands and thousands of views. So that's really cool.
Exaggerate much there, dude? As of 114, it had 1,100 views on my channel. With the finished video, 319 views where it was live, okay, 337 views on your channel, but it did have 1,129 views for the after show on Steve's channel.
The fact is, like, you've got coyotes in one species, you've got dogs and wolves in another species, and yet they can all 3 interbreed and produce fertile offspring.
See, there it is. He agrees with me again. Then he goes on to lie about what actually happened before the debate.
In order to get the first debate a while back, I had to actually chase him around because he and Steve were running around talking about I wouldn't debate them. And just the opposite was true. I'd been challenging them to go live streaming with me. And then they said, well, you won't leave the safety of your place, so come to our place. And they expected me to turn it down, but I accepted. And then they backed out.
What actually happened was I accepted his terms to debate, then I offered to let him go first. He initially accepted that, then he freaked out and would not debate unless I went first and he had the last word. It's still there in the Creationism Facebook group. No one's deleted it. You can still see it to this day.
He went through a presentation claiming that we had all of these ancestors, like Homo habilis, Homo ergaster, Homo erectus, etc. He gave kind of a history of the evolution of mankind according to evolutionists.
I didn't give a brief history of mankind. I didn't talk about Homo habilis. I started with Neanderthals, and I stuck with them, except for to mention the previous species, Homo heidelbergensis, and other species that were alive at the same time.
In order for you to test your theory, you have to check the actual DNA of these creatures to see if they are in fact related to us. And you can't, because we've never extracted the DNA of an ergaster or a habilis or an erectus. We've never extracted the DNA from these guys.
Well, this is obviously wrong since no one had ever heard of DNA when Darwin came up with his theory. To test a theory or a hypothesis, we can use its predictive value. To test a hypothesis about the change of kind or species from earlier species to ape to modern and human, we can predict that we would find evidence in the fossil record for such a transitional change. We would predict the recent layers would contain modern humans, but at some point, anatomically modern humans would cease to exist in the fossil record, and we would see only evidence of species with both primitive and derived traits, transitional species, becoming more primitive as the fossils get older, ending up with only the early apes in the oldest layers. And that's exactly what we find. We never see the primitive earlier forms in the same layers with the modern humans.
And that is the definition of species. If you can produce fertile offspring, if you can reproduce and produce fertile offspring, you are in fact a species. So now the thing is, you see, we've got the DNA of the Denisovan, we've got the DNA of the Neanderthal, and what do they prove? The DNA of both prove that we are in fact the same species. The human genome carries about 20% of the Neanderthal genome, and we carry a percentage of the Denisovan genome. Now, what this means is that we obviously interbred.
Now, here is a biological definition of species that Eric brings up over and over and over as the only accepted, the universally accepted definition of species. An article titled, "Why Should We Care About Species?" published in Nature Education says, the questions, what are species and how do we identify species, are difficult to answer and have led to debate and disagreement among biologists. The most obvious problem with calling that a universally accepted definition is, what about organisms that don't reproduce sexually? You certainly can't include them in that. Eric completely ignores the phylogenetic species concept. Because of the limitations using the BSC, the biological species concept, to make decisions about species, many biologists have proposed other ways to identify species. One popular approach is called the phylogenetic species concept, or the PSC. There are actually several versions of the PSC, but they all agree that species can be identified on the basis of shared traits, like I showed with Neanderthals versus Homo sapiens. A group of organisms that all share one or more features pointing to a unique common ancestor, which in turn is not shared by members of other species, would meet the criterion of species under the PSC. Here's a clip from another discussion Eric had.
Yeah, his presentation, he did a good job at the presentation, his first presentation there. And I can appreciate somebody that's prepared, but the only thing is, it just had nothing to do with anything that we were talking about. He considers Neanderthal a cousin to mankind and not the same species at all.
Well, that's where he chimed in, and well, we have so much genetic material that is Neanderthal.
Yeah. But he didn't
right.
have any genetic material that was anything else. He kept trying to say that we have all this genetic material for all these alleged ancestors of man, and yet he couldn't produce a single drop of it. And he kept going back to Neanderthal. And I kept saying, yeah, but Neanderthal is not an ancestor. Nobody claims Neanderthal is an ancestor. I just couldn't figure out why a guy would try to do that, try to pass off a Neanderthal as something else. I'm sure if his associates had heard him, they'd have laughed him out of the building for doing that.
Well, first of all, I never tried to pass off Neanderthal as our direct ancestor. As you've said a couple times, I referred to them as our cousins, and I clearly showed that in my slides. Now, as far as what my associates or people that study paleoanthropology would say, I actually asked this question in the group on August 15th, 2017, a group of 10,000 members. Okay, my question was, are paleoanthropologists considering or currently classifying modern humans and Neanderthals as Homo sapiens sapiens and Homo sapiens neanderthalensis, or has that fallen away since the Neanderthal genome was sequenced? Now, of course, I got a response back that says mostly separate species, but still considered by some as a subspecies. But again, there's very few that do that now. So I would be correct then in saying that most have dropped the Homo sapiens neanderthalensis classification, and they are now considered two separate but closely related species, not subspecies. And again, the answer I got was yes. This is from that same discussion.
I found his tactics questionable, cutting short the debate and cutting short on some points here.
Yeah,
I
that
find
that right there, you don't do that in a
no,
philosophical argument.
I was not making a philosophical argument. I didn't come to make a philosophical argument. I came prepared with facts. Eric, on the other hand, spent most of his time talking about Piltdown Man and Nebraska Man and other things, which had really nothing to do with the debate. And if you're going to do that, it shows that you're using a pre-rehearsed script that really had nothing to do with what we were talking about. Here's the reason I ended the debate. You couldn't define what your claim was. It's in the title of the debate. Okay, I need you to define what you meant by Homo neanderthalensis was a different race of modern humans.
how much
And you have
pygmy
not done that.
DNA do you have?
That has nothing to do with the question
Well,
I just
sure it
asked.
does. How much pygmy DNA do you have? Do you have any?
That has absolutely nothing
Do
to
you
do
have
with the
any
question
pygmy
I just
DNA in
asked.
you at all?
Are you going to answer the question
Well,
I
yeah,
asked?
pygmy is a race of man. Do you have any pygmy DNA?
I asked you to define it. I'm not going on
Okay.
a question and answer hunt with you.
Okay, if the
Okay.
pygmies
I
went,
don't know. I
the
have not.
pygmies have a
Pygmy
different
was
type.
not. I could have pygmy DNA in me. I have no idea. I'm
Okay.
sure we share at least 99.99% of the same DNA. Okay,
Look, dude,
because
if
we're
we
both
are the
Homo
same,
sapiens.
if we are
That
the
is
same,
clear.
if we are the same species as the Neanderthal, and by definition we are, then they are a race of man. Just
are
like the pygmies are a race of man, like the Zulus are a race of man.
Well, define
If
race.
something were to happen, oh, everybody knows what race.
Race is arbitrarily defined and applied, and you gave us no definition, not even what your understanding of the term race is. I think it's pretty obvious why Eric made so many mistakes and why he tried to say that I said things like Neanderthals were directly ancestral to us. I think this clip from the end of my presentation shows why. Your turn. Right there. I'm not hearing you, Wolf. I think you're muted.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. I
All right.
stepped away for a second there. I'm sorry.
I hope you didn't miss anything.
Oh, yeah.
Now, since the debate, Eric came at me with several of his Facebook profiles. I had to block each one. He's demanding that I debate him again. He uploaded videos, like I said, with my name in the title, a supposed second debate we had where he took some messages that we exchanged before I blocked him on Facebook and supposedly debated them. It's all a little bit crazy, and at this point, I'm just absolutely not interested in doing this again. I have a lot of better things to do with my time.